Hi guys. Tonight, we're going to embark on a very slow, very gentle journey into the deepest parts of human history. Or perhaps, even before history as we know it. Let the soft hum of my voice, and the quiet thoughts we stir, guide you into a state of deep relaxation. Imagine yourself settling into a comfortable chair, perhaps by a window where you can hear the faint patter of rain, or the gentle whisper of the wind through ancient trees. We're going to explore a possibility, a quiet question that has lingered on the fringes of our understanding for a very long time. What if humanity, as we know it, isn't the first advanced civilization to grace this earth? What if we are, in a sense, a reset, a new beginning after an older, forgotten story? It's a thought that asks us to broaden our minds, to stretch the canvas of time beyond the familiar brushstrokes of recorded history. Our history books, our archaeological digs, they paint a picture that largely begins just a few thousand years ago. We speak of the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, the rise of Egypt along the Nile, the majestic Indus Valley. And these are indeed profound and incredible chapters in our collective story. But what if the book itself has pages missing? What if there were chapters written long, long before these, chapters that have simply faded from view? Think for a moment about the incredible fragility of evidence. Our modern world, with its skyscrapers of steel and glass, its intricate networks of wires and concrete, it feels so permanent, doesn't it? So utterly undeniable. Yet, imagine what 1,000 years, or 5,000, or even 10,000 years of relentless wind, rain, earthquake, and ice could do to it. Imagine the creeping vines, the shifting sands, the slow, insistent grind of geological forces. Concrete crumbles, steel rusts, wood decays, and even stone eventually succumbs to the patient erosion of time. The grand structures we build today, designed to last, how much would truly remain, recognizable and intact, after an immense sweep of millennia? Archaeology, wonderful as it is, relies on finding things. It relies on the survival of artifacts, the preservation of structures, the quiet presence of something left behind for us to discover. But what if those things were never built to last for tens of thousands of years? What if the materials used were organic, biodegradable, destined to return to the earth long before we ever picked up our trowels and brushes? Imagine a civilization that perhaps didn't focus on massive, enduring stone monuments, but rather on more ephemeral forms of art, technology, or even spiritual expression. What trace would such a civilization leave? Consider the vastness of the earth itself, and the incredibly tiny fraction of it that we have actually explored in detail. We've scratched the surface, sifted through layers in specific, often easily accessible regions. But what about the deep ocean floors, where entire landmasses have sunk over eons? What about the vast, unexplored jungles, beneath layers of earth that have accumulated over countless generations? What about areas now buried beneath deserts, or swallowed by glaciers, or transformed by volcanic activity? The earth is an immense, dynamic entity, constantly reshaping itself. What lies hidden beneath its ever-changing skin, waiting to be revealed? Or perhaps, never to be seen again? The idea of lost civilizations, of advanced cultures existing long before recorded history, is not a new one. It's an echo that resonates through the stories and myths of cultures across the globe. These aren't just fanciful tales. They are often deeply ingrained narratives, passed down through generations. Speaking of cataclysms, great floods, and the fall of ancient golden ages, they hint at a world that existed before the one we currently inhabit, A world perhaps far more complex and sophisticated than we generally allow for in our conventional timelines. Let's take a quiet journey now into some of these ancient memories, these stories whispered across the millennia. Imagine, if you will, the land between the two rivers, Mesopotamia, a place often called the cradle of our civilization. Here, in the ancient city of Sumer, very old clay tablets tell a story of a time before the Great Flood. It's a story woven into the fabric of their understanding of the world. And within it, we find the tale of Utna. Picture an old man, perhaps with a long beard, his eyes holding the wisdom of countless years. He lived in a time when the world was filled with people, and the gods, for reasons known only to themselves, decided to bring a great destruction upon the earth. The world had become too noisy, too chaotic, and the gods sought to cleanse it. But one of the gods, the wise and benevolent Enki, had a soft spot for humanity. He couldn't directly defy the other gods, but he could warn someone. So Enki came to Utnapishtim, not in a dream, but by whispering through the thin reed wall of his simple dwelling. He told Utnapishtim of the coming deluge, of the vast, devastating waters that would soon cover the land. And he gave him a solemn instruction: dismantle your house and build a great boat. Not just any boat, but a massive vessel, sturdy and watertight, capable of carrying not only his family, but also the seeds of all living things, the animals of the field, two of every kind. A man of faith and obedience set about his task. He worked tirelessly, day after day, week after week, as his neighbors and friends watched, perhaps with curiosity, perhaps with amusement, perhaps with concern. They might have asked him why he was building such a colossal ark, in a land where great floods were not uncommon, but never on this scale. He would have explained, quietly, solemnly, what he had been told. And then the day came. The skies darkened, the winds howled, and the rain began to fall. Not just a gentle shower, but a torrent, as if the heavens themselves had opened. The waters rose, swiftly and mercilessly, covering the plains, swallowing the cities, reaching towards the mountain tops. For 6 days and 6 nights, the storm raged, a terrifying, relentless roar. Inside his great boat, Utnapishtim and his family, along with all the animals, rode the swelling waters, tossed and turned, but safe within their sanctuary. When the 7th day dawned, the storm began to subside. The winds lessened, the rain softened, and Utnapishtim cautiously peered out. All he could see was an endless expanse of water stretching to the horizon. The world as he knew it was gone. His boat eventually came to rest upon a mountain, Mount Nicaea. He waited, patiently, for 7 more days, before sending out a dove. The dove returned, finding no place to land. He sent out a swallow, which also returned. Finally, he sent out a raven, and the raven did not return. A sign that the waters had receded enough for land to reappear. Utnapishtim emerged from his ark into a new, fresh world. He offered a sacrifice to the gods, a thanksgiving for their survival. And the gods, seeing the sweet aroma, relented in their anger. They blessed Utnapishtim and his wife, granting them immortality, so they could live forever at the mouth of the rivers, a testament to their endurance and a promise of a new beginning for humanity. This story, passed down through countless generations, speaks of a reset, a profound and absolute cleansing of the world. It's not just a tale of survival. It's a memory of a complete societal collapse, followed by a rebuilding from almost nothing. Now, let's drift to another part of the world, to the sun-drenched lands of ancient Greece. Here too, among the olive groves and the marble temples, there are whispers of a great flood. It's the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. Imagine a time when the world was filled with wickedness, when humanity had strayed far from the paths of righteousness. The mighty Zeus, king of the gods, looked down upon the earth with a heavy heart. He saw the corruption, the injustice, the endless strife, and he decided that a purification was needed. He resolved to send a great flood to wipe away this degenerate race of mortals. But once again, there was a compassionate voice amidst the divine council. Prometheus, the Titan who had gifted fire to humanity and suffered greatly for it, still held a fondness for his creation. He foresaw the coming catastrophe and, in an act of quiet mercy, warned his son. Deucalion, a just and pious man, was told to build a great wooden chest or ark. He was to gather his wife, Pyrrha, and perhaps a few provisions, and prepare for the deluge. The skies soon opened, and the rivers swelled, the seas rose, and a vast unbroken sheet of water covered the entire land. For 9 days and 9 nights, the storm raged, submerging cities, forests, and mountains alike. All of humanity perished, swept away by the relentless waves, except for Deucalion and Pyrrha, safe within their wooden vessel. Their ark drifted on the boundless waters, tossed by the immense currents, until finally, after many days, it came to rest upon the peak of Mount Parnassus. As the waters slowly receded, Deucalion and Pyrrha emerged, the sole survivors of the human race, standing alone on a desolate, waterlogged world. They were filled with despair, for they were truly alone. But the gods, seeing their piety and their survival, took pity on them. Zeus sent his messenger, Hermes, to instruct them. They were told to throw the bones of their great mother over their shoulders. Deucalion, a man of wisdom, understood that Great Mother referred to the earth, and her bones were the stones. So, with hope in their hearts, they began to pick up stones and cast them behind them. As the stones landed, a miracle occurred. The stones thrown by Deucalion transformed into men, and those thrown by Pyrrha became women. Thus, humanity was reborn. A new race sprung from the very bones of the earth, guided by the wisdom of these two survivors. This tale, too, speaks of a complete obliteration and a restart. It's a memory not of gradual change, but of a sudden, catastrophic event that reset the course of human existence. And then, of course, there is the story most familiar to many of us, echoed in the ancient texts of the Abrahamic faiths, the story of Noah. Imagine a time when the earth was filled with violence, with corruption, and with a deep moral decay. The Creator, looking upon his creation, saw that the wickedness of humanity was great, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. His heart was grieved, and he decided to bring an end to all flesh, to sweep away everything that lived upon the earth. But among the corrupted masses, there was one man, Noah, who found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation, and he walked faithfully with God. And so the Lord spoke to Noah, revealing his plan to destroy the world with a flood, and instructing him to build a colossal ark. This ark was to be made of gopher wood, pitched within and without with tar, to make it completely watertight. It was to be immense, with 3 decks, and a window and a door in its side. And Noah was commanded to bring into the ark 2 of every kind of living creature, male and female, along with his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives. He was also to gather every kind of food to sustain all who would be inside. Noah, in quiet faith, obeyed every instruction. He spent many, many years building the enormous vessel, perhaps under the watchful, disbelieving eyes of his neighbors, who surely must have questioned his sanity. What was this old man doing, building a massive boat so far from any great body of water? But Noah persevered, his faith unwavering. And then the day came. The heavens opened, and the fountains of the great deep broke forth. The rain poured down for 40 days and 40 nights, an unending deluge. The waters swelled and rose higher and higher, covering the land, submerging the hills, and finally covering even the highest mountains under the whole heaven. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, and all mankind. Only Noah and those with him in the ark remained alive, floating safely on the surface of the vast, surging waters. After 150 days, the waters began to recede, slowly, gently. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah waited, patiently, sending out a raven and then a dove, which returned with an olive leaf, a sign of new life, a promise of land. Finally, when the earth was dry, Noah and his family, and all the creatures, emerged from the ark into a pristine, renewed world. They offered sacrifices of thanksgiving, and the Lord made a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy all life by a flood, setting his rainbow in the clouds as a beautiful, silent testament to that promise. These stories, from different cultures, separated by vast distances and millennia, share an uncanny similarity. They speak of a great deluge, a catastrophic event that wiped the slate clean, leaving only a few survivors to restart the human story. They are not isolated tales. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of such flood myths from cultures across every continent, from the Aboriginal peoples of Australia to the indigenous tribes of the Americas, from ancient Chinese legends to Hindu. The specifics may differ, the names of the heroes and gods may change, but the core narrative remains remarkably consistent: a world destroyed by water, and a new beginning for humanity. It's tempting to dismiss these as mere myths, imaginative explanations for natural phenomena, or allegories for moral lessons. And perhaps, on one level, they are. But what if, just for a moment, we consider another possibility? What if these aren't just myths, but memories, distant, fragmented, perhaps distorted over countless retellings, yet still holding a kernel of truth about a world that was before our world? There is a particular kind of silence that exists in the presence of very old stone. If you have ever stood before a mountain or walked through a canyon carved by an ancient river, you know that wait. Stone doesn't hurry. It doesn't breathe like we do, yet it seems to hold a record of every winter, every sunrise, and every storm that has ever passed over it. When we look at the ruins of our ancestors, we are looking at the only medium durable enough to survive the immense pressure of millennia. But some of these stones, they seem to speak of a craftsmanship, a precision, and a timeline that feels almost out of place. They sit there, heavy and silent, challenging the neat, linear story we have written for ourselves. Let's travel first, in our minds, to the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey. Imagine a dusty, sun-drenched plateau called Göbekli. For a long time, this was just a hill, a place where local farmers might have grazed their sheep, unaware that beneath their feet lay something that would eventually turn our understanding of history upside down. When archaeologists began to peel back the layers of Earth in the mid-1990s, they found something they didn't think could exist. They found massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, arranged in circles, some standing nearly 20 feet tall and weighing many tons. What makes Göbekli Tepe so quiet and yet so startling is its age. It dates back roughly 12,000 years. To put that in perspective, this site was being constructed while the last ice age was still fading. In the traditional story of human progress, 12,000 years ago, we were supposed to be simple hunters. We weren't supposed to have permanent settlements, let alone the social organization or the engineering knowledge to quarry, carve, and transport massive stones. And yet, there they are. These pillars aren't just rough-hewn rocks. They are elegantly shaped, many of them adorned with intricate lower-leaf carvings of foxes, scorpions, lions, and vultures. Think about the hands that touched those stones. Think about the eyes that watched the shadows move across those carvings 10,000 years before the first pharaoh ever sat upon a throne. How did they do it? There is no evidence of metal tools at this site. No wheels, no beasts of burden. Just the slow, patient labor of human beings working with stone against stone. But the precision of the circles, the alignment of the pillars, it suggests a level of astronomical knowledge and architectural planning that we usually reserve for much later civilizations. It feels as though we walked into a room halfway through a conversation, missing the beginning of the sentence. Was Göbekli Tepe the start of something new, or was it the final, fading embers of something much older in knowledge, that had survived a great upheaval and was being preserved in the only way the builders knew how? As we let the dust of Turkey settle, let us drift across the ocean, high into the thin, cold air of the Bolivian Andes. Imagine a place called Punku. It is a site of shattered majesty, lying over 12,000 feet above sea level. Here, the stones are not limestone, but massive blocks of red sandstone and incredibly hard andesite. What strikes you first about Punku isn't just the size of the stones, though, some weigh over 100 tons. It is the geometry. The stones here are carved with such startling, clinical precision that they look almost like prefabricated machine parts. There are right angles so sharp they could be measured with a modern square. There are drill holes, perfectly circular and uniform and long, straight grooves that look as though they were rooted into the hard rock. The blocks are shaped with interlocking notches, designed to fit together like a giant lithic jigsaw puzzle. When you look at these ruins, you don't see the organic, slightly uneven handiwork we often associate with ancient cultures. You see something that looks calculated. Imagine the silence of that high Andean plateau. Imagine the incredible effort it took to move these stones from quarries miles away, across treacherous terrain, to a place where the air is so thin it's difficult to breathe. If we follow the standard timeline, the people who built this didn't have a written language or the hard metal tools necessary to carve andesite with such ease. And yet, the stones remain. They are scattered now, tossed about by some ancient violent force, perhaps an earthquake, perhaps something else lying in the dirt, like the discarded toys of a giant. We look at them and we wonder, what kind of mind conceived of this? What kind of civilization reaches a point where they can treat stone like it is soft clay, shaping it with a precision that mirrors our own industrial age? Could it be that Punku is a remnant of a technology we have forgotten, a way of working with the world that didn't follow the path we eventually took? The stones don't answer. They just sit in the cold wind, holding their secrets. Now, let us move to the most famous stones of all. Let us drift to the Giza Plateau in Egypt, as the sun sets and the desert sands turn a deep, bruised purple. The Great Pyramid. We have seen it 1,000 times in photographs, but in the stillness of our imagination, try to feel its true scale. It is composed of roughly 2.3 million stone blocks. Each one weighs several tons. It was, for thousands of years, the tallest structure on the face of the earth. The Great Pyramid is a marvel of mathematics. Its proportions contain the values of pi and the golden ratio. Its 4 sides are aligned to true north with an accuracy that is almost difficult to comprehend, especially for a culture that supposedly didn't have the compass or modern surveying equipment. But beyond the math, there is the sheer physical reality of the construction. The casing stones, the white limestone that once covered the pyramid, making it shine like a beacon, were polished to a mirror-like finish and fitted together so tightly that you couldn't slide a human hair between them. Inside, in the king's chamber, the walls are made of massive blocks of red granite, brought from Aswan, hundreds of miles away. These blocks are perfectly level, perfectly plumb. We are told the pyramids were built as tombs for pharaohs, but no mummy has ever been found in the Great Pyramid. No hieroglyphs adorn its inner walls. It is a silent, stark, and purely geometric expression of something. When we look at the weathering on the stones or the erosion on the nearby Sphinx, some researchers suggest that these monuments might be much, much older than the Old Kingdom of Egypt. They suggest that the dynastic Egyptians may have found these structures, already standing weathered by thousands of years of rain and wind, and claimed them, restored them, and built their own culture around them. Imagine the Sphinx, not as it looks now, but as it might have looked thousands of years earlier. Some geologists point to the deep, vertical fissures on the body of the Sphinx and the surrounding enclosure walls. This kind of erosion, they argue, isn't caused by wind and sand. It's caused by heavy, cascading rainfall. But the Giza Plateau hasn't seen that kind of sustained, torrential rain for many thousands of years, not since the end of the last ice age. If the stones were carved by rain, then the Sphinx must have been there when the Sahara was still green, when the world was a very different place. We are left with a quiet, persistent question. When we see these feats of engineering, the astronomical alignments of Gogwitli Tepe, the machined precision of Puma Punku, the mathematical perfection of Giza, we seeing the very first attempts of a young humanity to build? Or are we seeing the inheritance of an older world? Imagine a world that came before ours, not necessarily a world of computers and electricity, but a world with its own sophisticated understanding of the earth, of the stars, and of the hidden properties of stone. Perhaps they didn't use fire and iron to shape their world. Perhaps they used sound, or vibration, or a deep, intuitive understanding of geometry that we have since lost. Imagine that this civilization reached a height we can barely imagine, only to be met with a global cataclysm or reset. The waters rose, the earth shifted, and the knowledge was fragmented. The survivors of such a world would be left with nothing but their memories and the few structures, durable enough to survive. They would wander into new lands, carrying with them the blueprints of a lost glory. They would try to rebuild, try to teach the simpler people they encountered the arts of agriculture, of writing, and of building in stone. But as the generations passed, the memory would fade. The high technology would become magic. The history would become myth. All that would be left are the stones, the massive silent sentinels that refuse to decay. Think of the immense effort it takes to move a single 100-ton block. Think of the patience. We live in an age of the temporary. We build with wood and drywall, with plastic and thin glass. Our structures are designed to last decades, maybe a century. But these ancient builders, they built for eternity. They built as if they knew that time is a predator, and that only the heaviest, hardest materials can escape its teeth. They left us a message written in granite and limestone, a message that says, we were here. We knew the stars. We understood the weight of the world. We often think of history as a ladder, each rung leading us higher, from the primitive to the advanced. But perhaps history is more like a wheel. Perhaps civilizations rise, reach a peak, and then fall, returning to the earth to begin the cycle again. If that is true, then we are not the pinnacle of the human story. Imagine, if you can, a world 12,900 years ago. It is a time we call the Younger Dryas. It is a name that sounds poetic, named after a small, white alpine flower, the dryas, octopetalar, that flourishes in the cold. But behind that delicate name lies a story of profound, staggering transformation. For a long time, the Earth had been waking up from the last great ice age. The glaciers, those miles-thick sheets of ice that had gripped the northern continents for millennia, were finally retreating. The world was warming. Forests were creeping northward, filling valleys that had been choked by ice for generations. The ancestors of our modern world people, like the Clovis culture in North America, were thriving in a land of plenty, hunting the great mammoths and mastodons across vast, greening plains. Life was finding its rhythm again. The sun was felt more warmly on the skin. The seasons were becoming predictable. And then, quite suddenly, the music stopped. Within a span of perhaps only a decade, a mere heartbeat in the life of the Earth. The warming halted and reversed with terrifying speed. It was as if a great celestial hand had reached down and turned the thermostat of the planet back to the depths of the Ice Age. The glaciers stopped melting and began to groan forward once more. The forests died back, replaced by the hardy, cold-dwelling flowers that give this era its name. The temperature in some parts of the world dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in just a few years. Imagine being a person living in that transition. Imagine the confusion as the winters grew longer and longer, and the summers shorter and colder, until the snows of one year simply didn't melt before the snows of the next year arrived. Imagine the silence of the landscape as the great herds of animals began to thin, and the familiar plants withered in the biting frost. This wasn't a slow change that took centuries to notice. It was a collapse. We have to ask ourselves, what could cause the entire planet to shiver so violently? For a long time, science looked for terrestrial answers: changes in ocean currents. Perhaps the sudden dumping of massive amounts of glacial meltwater into the Atlantic, shutting down the conveyor belt of heat that keeps our world temperate. And while that may be part of the story, in recent years, a more haunting possibility has emerged. A possibility that feels like a scene from an ancient, forgotten epic. Imagine looking up at the night sky 12,900 years ago. The stars are bright and clear, untroubled by the lights of any city. But then, a new light appears, a streak of fire, growing larger, brighter, until it rivals the moon itself. It isn't a single object, but a swarm, a comet, perhaps, that has fragmented in the darkness of space, its pieces now hurtling toward the blue-green marble of the Earth. The theory suggests that these fragments struck the great North American ice sheet, and perhaps parts of Europe and Asia as well. These weren't just impacts. They were atmospheric explosions of unimaginable power. Imagine the shockwaves rippling through the air, flattening forests for hundreds of miles. Imagine the heat, intense enough to turn the soil into glass and ignite the very atmosphere. The sky would have turned a bruised, angry red as massive wildfires broke out across entire continents, sending plumes of black soot and ash into the stratosphere, blotting out the sun. Underneath this shroud of darkness, the world grew cold. The impact winter had begun. And for the people living then, for the Clovis culture, whose elegant stone spearheads are found across the Americas, the world simply ended. Their archaeological record vanishes almost entirely at this point. They were there, thriving and widespread, and then they were gone. When we think about the first civilization, we often look for gold and monuments. But what if the most advanced things they possessed were not physical objects, but a deep harmonic relationship with the world and knowledge of the stars, of navigation, of the subtle energies of the earth? If a comet impact were to happen today, our satellites would fall, our power grids would fail, and our concrete cities would eventually be reclaimed by the forest. But if a civilization existed then, a civilization that lived more in balance with the natural world, their loss would be just as absolute. Their libraries would have been made of organic materials, skin, wood, or perhaps just the oral traditions of the elders. When the fire came, and then the cold, all of that would have turned to ash and silence. There is a quiet, heavy thought that comes with the study of the younger Dryas. It is the realization of how fragile our permanent world truly is. We think of the climate as something that changes over millions of years, something slow and stately. But the ice cores and the sediment layers tell a different story. They tell a story of tipping points, where the Earth's systems reach a limit and then snap into a new state, as the fires of the impacts died down, and the long, cold centuries of the younger Dryas wore on. The survivors would have been pushed to the fringes of the world. They would have retreated to the coasts, or to the equatorial regions, where the cold was less biting. And here is where the story takes another turn, a turn that leads us back to the water. For over 1,000 years, the Earth remained in this frozen state. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the younger Dryas ended. Around 11,600 years ago, a date that coincidentally matches Plato's description of the sinking of Atlantis, the world warmed with an even greater violence. The ice didn't just melt, it collapsed. Imagine the sound of a continent-sized glacier shattering. Imagine the trillions of tons of water, held back for millennia, suddenly released into the oceans. This was the time of the great floods. This was the time when the sea levels didn't just creep up, they surged. In some places, the coastline might have moved inland by miles in a single day. Think of the vast areas of the world that are now underwater but were dry land during the Ice Age. The Persian Gulf was once a lush, green valley. The North Sea was a vast plain called Doggerland, where hunters tracked deer through meadows. The Caribbean was a series of connected landmasses. If there was a first civilization, it likely would have been coastal. Most of humanity lives near the water today, and it was likely no different then. Imagine a city of white stone, built on a beautiful, temperate coast. The people there have mastered the arts of the sea. They have maps of the stars and a deep understanding of the seasons. And then the pulses of meltwater arrive. The ocean rises 10 feet, then 20, then 50. The temples are submerged. The harbors vanish. The survivors flee to the high ground, leaving behind everything they had built. Within a few generations, the memory of that city would become a legend. Within 1,000 years, it would become a myth. And beneath the waves, the salt water and the shifting sands would begin the slow, methodical work of erasing the evidence. Stone walls would be covered by coral. Metal would corrode and dissolve. Wood would rot. Eventually, all that would remain would be a few strange mounds on the sea floor. Or perhaps a persistent story told by grandmothers about a golden age that was swallowed by the sea. When we look at the Younger Dryas, we aren't just looking at a cold snap in a textbook. We are looking at a possible crime scene, the site of a global tragedy that may have reset the clock for the human race. It explains why we see such a sudden explosion of civilization around 10,000 years ago. It wasn't that we suddenly learned how to farm or build. It was that we were finally able to come out of the shadows. We were the refugees of a lost world, trying to remember the lessons our ancestors had learned before the sky fell and the waters rose. Think of the Clovis people again. We find their beautiful, fluted spear points all over North America, crafted with a skill that suggests a long tradition of artistry. And then, right at the layer of the comet, impact marked by a thin, dark line of black matte, sediment-rich in nanodiamonds and iridium, the points stop. They are replaced by much cruder, simpler tools. It is the signature of a dark age. It is the signature of a people who have lost their teachers, their resources, and their stability. They didn't evolve into something else. They were broken, and they had to start over from the very beginning. It is a humbling thought, isn't it? To realize that the earth can be so indifferent to our progress. We build our empires on the skin of a planet that is prone to sudden, violent moods. We are like ants building a nest on the edge of a sleeping giant. Most of the time, the giant is still and we grow confident. We think our nest is the center of the universe. But every now and then, the giant stirs, or a pebble falls from above, and everything we have worked for is scattered to the winds. But there is also something hopeful in this story, because if we are a reset, it means we have done this before. It means that deep in our DNA, in the very structure of our brains, there is a blueprint for greatness. We aren't just a random accident that stumbled into civilization. We are a species with a long, long history of reaching for the stars, even if we've had to start from the ground more than once. As you drift further into the quiet of the night, imagine the world during that long, cold silence of the Younger Dryas. Imagine the survivors huddled around fires, looking up at the smoke-filled sky, telling stories of the old times. They would speak of the cities under the sea, of the machines that could move mountains, of the gods who walked among men. For a long time, we have looked at the myths of our ancestors as mere poetry, beautiful, yes, but ultimately the inventions of a pre-scientific mind trying to make sense of a chaotic world. But as we settle into the quiet of this evening, let us consider a different perspective. What if a myth is simply a very old piece of data? What if it is a memory that has been polished by thousands of years of retelling, until only the most vital, most indestructible core remains? When we look across the globe, we find a story that is so persistent, so hauntingly similar in its details, that it feels less like a coincidence and more like a collective witness. Let us drift first to the ancient library of Nineveh, where the clay tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh lay buried for millennia under the desert sands. In this story, which predates most of our recorded history, we meet Utan. He is a man who was granted immortality, but the way he earned it is what draws us in tonight. He tells the hero Gilgamesh of a time when the gods grew restless. The world was full of the noise of humanity, and in their frustration, the divine powers decided to wipe the slate clean. Imagine the atmosphere of that tale. It isn't a story of triumph, but of a terrifying, overwhelming silence that preceded the storm. One god, Enki, whispers the secret to the wall of Utnapishtim's reed hut, warning him to abandon his possessions and build a giant boat. The description of the storm that follows is not one of a simple rain. It describes the foundations of the earth breaking apart, the sky turning dark, and a tempest so fierce that even the gods were afraid and retreated to the highest heavens. When the waters finally recede, Utnapishtim looks out upon a world where all of humanity has turned to clay. The landscape is flat, featureless, and silent. He falls to his knees and weeps. This same vibration, this same frequency of memory, hums through the pages of the Bible in the story of Noah. We find the same elements: a world that has lost its way, a divine warning, a vessel built to preserve the seeds of life, and a mountain peak acting as a sanctuary as the world beneath it disappears. We often focus on the animals and the rainbow, but for our journey tonight, I want you to focus on the water. In the Hebrew account, it says the fountains of the great deep were broken up. This is a very specific, very evocative image. It suggests that the catastrophe didn't just come from the clouds. It came from the earth itself. It was as if the planet were exhaling its oceans, turning the dry land into a memory dot now. Let us move across the vast expanse of the Atlantic to the misty highlands of the Quiche, Maya, in what is now Guatemala. Here, the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, tells a story of the origins of the world. It speaks of the heart of sky and the creators who tried several times to make a human being who would remember and honor them. Their earlier attempts were failures, and so they decided to destroy the people made of wood. The Popol Vuh describes a heavy resin falling from the sky. It speaks of a great flood, but also of a darkness so profound that the sun and moon were hidden. The very objects of the people's lives, their grinding stones, their pots, their dogs, rose up against them in the chaos. It is a surreal, dreamlike passage, reflecting a world where the natural order has completely dissolved. It is a story of a reset, an ending that was necessary for a new beginning to take place. As you breathe slowly, letting your mind wander between these different cultures, notice the common threads: the warning, the chosen survivor, the vessel, the mountain, the birds sent out to find land, and most importantly, the sense that the world before the flood was different, perhaps older, perhaps more complexant, that the flood was the boundary line between that forgotten era and our own. If these stories were only found in the Middle East, we might say they were simply passed from one neighbor to another, but we find them in the oral traditions of the Ojibwe in North America, who speak of Waynabuzu and the flood that covered the earth, requiring him to dive deep into the water to find a bit of mud to start the world anew. We find it in the Hindu tradition of Manu, who was warned by a small Fishan avatar of Vishnu to build a ship because a great deluge was coming to cleanse the world. Manu tied his ship to the horn of the giant fish and was guided to the safety of the Himalayas. If we look at the geography of these myths, they often center around the end of the last ice age. That period we spoke of earlier, the Younger Dryas. Around 11,600 years ago, the sea levels rose by hundreds of feet. For a coastal civilization, this would not have been a slow, manageable change. It would have been the end of the world. The fountains of the great deep might have been the sudden collapse of ice dams. releasing millions of cubic miles of water into the sea. The heavy resin or the fire from the sky might have been the soot and ash from a comet impact, blotting out the sun and creating the terrifying darkness. Described by the Maya, think about how a survivor would explain such an event to their grandchildren. They wouldn't have the language of geophysics or bolide impacts. They would speak of the anger of the gods, of the sky falling, and of the earth weeping. They would turn the catastrophe into a story, because stories are the only things that can survive the passage of 1,000 generations. Imagine a group of survivors gathered around a fire in a cave high above the new coastline. Below them, the cities where they were born are now hundreds of feet under the cold, salt water. Everything they knew, their books, their art, their tools is gone. All they have left is the language they speak and the memories in their heads. They tell the children about the great water. They tell them to never forget. And those children tell their children. And so it goes, for 10,000 years, until the memory becomes a myth. And the myth becomes a bedtime story. In the quiet of your room. Let the similarities between these stories wash over you like a gentle tide. There is the Epic of Gilgamesh, written on clay. There is the Bible, written on parchment. There is the Popol Vuh, preserved through oral tradition and later transcribed. They are like different mirrors, reflecting the same distant explosion. The image in each mirror is slightly distorted by the culture that holds it, but the light being reflected is the same. The possibility we are exploring tonight is that these myths are not fictions, but a form of ancient global news. They are the breaking news of 12,000 years ago, frozen in the amber of tradition. They suggest that we are a species with a shared trauma moment in our collective infancy when the world was taken away from us, and we had to learn to walk all over again. This shared memory is a powerful thing. It suggests that deep down, we all remember a time when the earth was different. We all remember a golden age or a garden that was lost. We all carry a certain wariness of the sky and the sea, a quiet knowledge that the stability of our world is a gift, not a guarantee. Think of the silence that followed these floods. In every story, there is a moment where the survivor opens a window or steps out onto the mud, and the world is utterly still. The birds have not yet begun to sing. The wind has died down. There is only the vast, empty horizon and the sound of the receding water. It is the silence of a reset. It is the moment between the old world and the new. Perhaps, as you fall asleep, you can imagine yourself in that silence. Not a frightening silence, but a peaceful one. The storm has passed. The water is calm. The earth is beginning to breathe again. You are safe on the mountain peak, and the stars are beginning to peek through the thinning clouds. We often think of ourselves as the masters of our history, but these myths suggest we are more like the inheritors of a very long, very mysterious legacy. We are the children of the survivors. We carry the resilience of Utnapishtim, the faith of Noah, the endurance of Manu, and the wisdom of the Maya creators. As the edges of your consciousness begin to blur, let the names and the dates fade away. You don't need to categorize them. Just feel the weight of the story. Feel the connection to those ancient people who sat by their fires and remembered the water. They were just like us. They felt the same cold, the same fear, and the same hope. They looked at the same moon that is shining somewhere in the sky tonight. The flood myths are not just about destruction. They are about survival. They are about the persistence of life and the continuity of the human spirit. They tell us that even when the world ends, something remains. The seeds are saved. the story continues. The water that covered the world in those myths is the same water that makes up the rain falling on a roof, the same water that flows in our veins. It is the great connector of our planet. It remembers everything. It remembers the cities it swallowed and the mountains it climbed. And perhaps, in our dreams, we can touch that memory. The world is quiet now. The stories have been told. The voices of the ancients are just a whisper in the wind, telling us that they were here, that they saw the Great Reset, and that they passed the torch to us. We are the keepers of the memory now, even if we don't always understand what it means. Let yourself drift now, away from the clay tablets and the sacred books, away from the giants and the arcs. Let yourself drift into the vast, dark ocean of sleep, where all stories eventually return. The water is warm and still. There are no storms here. There is only the slow, rhythmic pull of the tide, lulling you deeper and deeper into rest. Imagine the study of an admiral in the year 1513. The air is thick with the scent of old paper, cedarwood, and the salt of the Mediterranean. His name is Piri Reis, a renowned navigator and cartographer of the Ottoman Empire. He is hunched over a large piece of gazelle skin parchment, meticulously compiling a map of the known world. But Piri Reis is not just drawing from his own travels. He is a collector of secrets. In his own notes, written in the margins, he admits that his map is a synthesis of many others, some from his contemporaries, like Christopher Columbus, but others from what he calls the ancient kings. When you look at the Piri Reis map in your mind's eye, you see the familiar curves of the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America. They are placed with an accuracy that seems ahead of its time. But as your eye travels further south, following the coastline of South America as it bends toward the east, you find something that has puzzled scholars for decades. There, at the bottom of the world, is a landmass. Some look at it and see a distorted version of the South American tip, but others see something much more haunting. They see the coast of Antarctica. The mystery is not that a mapmaker in 1513 would imagine a southern continent, many did, calling it Terra Australis. The mystery lies in the detail. There are those who suggest that the map depicts the Queen Maudland coast of Antarctica, not as it looks today, buried under miles of crushing ice, but as it looks underneath that ice. It shows bays, rivers, and mountain ranges that were only confirmed in the 20th century through seismic sounding and modern technology. How could a map from the 16th century, based on ancient sources, show a continent that wasn't officially discovered until 1820? And more importantly, how could it show that continent without its ice? Let the thought drift slowly through your mind, like a leaf on a still pond. If the map is accurate, it implies that someone, at some point in the distant past, sailed those southern waters when the coastline was clear. It implies a level of seafaring and surveying that predates our recorded history by thousands of years. It suggests that while the northern hemispheres were perhaps struggling through the end of an ice age, there were travelers who were documenting the shape of the world with a precision we are only just beginning to appreciate. Now, let us move a few decades forward to the year 1531, to the work of a French mathematician and cartographer named Orens Fine. His map of the world is shaped like a heart, a beautiful, evocative image for a document of discovery. In the center of the southern hemisphere, he too places a vast continent. It is not a vague blob of ink. It is a detailed landmass with mountain ranges that follow the edges of the coast and internal drainage systems that resemble rivers. When modern researchers superimposed the Orens Fine map over a map of the subglacial topography of Antarctica, they found a startling correlation. The mountains seemed to be in the right places. The proportions seemed to reflect the actual landmass hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. We are left in a state of quiet reflection. We are not here to claim that these maps are proof of an ancient high-tech civilization, but rather to wonder about the persistence of knowledge. Information is a curious thing. It can be lost, buried, or burned, but sometimes it survives in fragments. It survives as a copy of a copy of a copy, passed down through libraries that no longer exist, from Alexandria to Constantinople, until it finds its way onto the desk of a Renaissance admiral or a French scholar. Imagine a group of ancient navigators, thousands of years before the first pharaoh, setting out in ships made of wood and red. They are not just wandering, they are measuring. They are using the stars to determine their latitude and longitude with a sophisticated understanding of the Earth's spherical shape. They map the coastlines of the Americas, the tip of Africa, and the ice-free shores of the southern continent. They return home, and their charts become the most precious treasures of their people. Then the climate shifts. The Younger Dryas arrives, or the great floods we spoke of earlier. The ice begins to march across the southern lands, swallowing the mountains and the riverbeds. The civilization that produced the maps fades into the mists of time, but the charts remain. They are kept in sacred archives, protected by people who no longer understand how they were made, but who recognize their value. They are used by later cultures to find their way, and eventually, they are used by Piri race to create a map for a sultan. It is a story of a long, slow inheritance. It suggests that our history is not a series of disconnected events, but a continuous, if often broken, thread. We are the beneficiaries of a ghost geography, a memory of the Earth. As it looked before the last great reset, think of the silence of Antarctica today. It is a world of white, a place where time seems to have frozen solid. The wind howls across a desert of snow, and the only sounds are the cracking of the ice and the groans of the glaciers. It is difficult to imagine it as a place of green mountains and flowing rivers, and yet we know that millions of years ago it was exactly that. The question these maps raise is whether it was like that much more recently, and whether there was anyone there to see it. The stones remember, the myths remember, and perhaps the maps remember too. They are drawings of a world that has been remodeled by the ice. They are like photographs of a childhood home that has since been torn down. We look at them and we feel a strange sense of recognition, a feeling that we have been here before. Let yourself drift now into the space between the known and the unknown. You don't need to decide if the maps are real or fake. In the world of sleep, there is no need for such sharp edges. Instead, just feel the vastness of the planet. Feel the way the continents have shifted and changed over the eons. Imagine the Earth as a living, breathing entity, constantly hiding and revealing its secrets. The cartographers of the past were trying to make sense of a world that was much larger than they were. They worked by candlelight, using compasses and dividers, trying to translate the curve of the horizon onto a flat surface. They were dreamers as much as they were scientists, and in their dreams they saw the whole Earth. As you close your eyes, imagine you are a traveler on one of those ancient ships. The sea is calm, and the stars are reflecting in the water like 1,000 tiny lanterns. You are sailing toward a coast that no longer exists in our time. You can see the green hills of Antarctica rising out of the blue ocean. The air is cool and fresh. There is no ice here, only the endless possibility of a new world. The maps are just pieces of parchment, but they are also windows. They allow us to look back at a time when the world was a different shape. They remind us that our current map is not the final one. The earth will change again. The ice will melt, or it will grow. The coastlines will retreat, or they will advance. We are just here for a brief moment, trying to sketch what we see before the light changes. The silence of the maps is a peaceful silence. It is the silence of things that have been preserved against all odds. It is the silence of a library at night, where the knowledge of the ages is resting, waiting for someone to walk through the aisles with a quiet heart. You are resting now, too. Your own internal map is becoming soft and blurred at the edges. You don't need to know exactly where you are. You only need to know that you are safe, and that the world is very old and very wise. The same stars that guided the ancient navigators are watching over you tonight. They don't change. They are the fixed points in our wandering story. Let the image of the heart-shaped map of Orance, fine, be the last thing you see. A map of the world held in the shape of a heart. It is a reminder that our search for our past is ultimately a search for ourselves. We want to know where we came from so we can understand who we are. The ink is dry. The parchment is folded. The admiral has put away his pen and blown out the candle. The room is dark and quiet. The only sound is the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. A sound that hasn't changed in 12,000 years. Sleep now, and let yourself be carried by the currents of history. You are a part of the geography of time. You are a landmark in the long story of the earth. Everything is in its right place. The world is vast, the mystery is deep, and you are exactly where you need to be. For a long time, we have been taught to see human progress as a ladder. We imagine ourselves climbing upward, rung by rung, leaving the primitive behind as we reach for the sophisticated. But many of the wisest minds of the ancient world saw it differently. They saw a wheel. They believed that civilizations are like living organisms. They are born, they grow into a vibrant youth. They reach a majestic maturity. And then, eventually, they grow old, they wither, and they return to the earth to provide the soil for the next turning. Let us reflect on the words of Plato, the philosopher of ancient Greece. We often speak of his story of Atlantis, the great island kingdom that was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. But for Plato, Atlantis wasn't just a tale of a lost city. It was an illustration of a cosmic law. He spoke of the great year, a cycle of thousands of years in which the heavens return to their original positions, and the earth undergoes a periodic cleansing by fire or by water. He suggested that humanity has been destroyed and reborn many times, and that each time we begin again, we do so with amnesia, like children who have forgotten their parents' names. Imagine the perspective of a mind that sees time not in years, but in epochs. To Plato, the first civilization wasn't a myth. It was a mathematical certainty. It was simply the previous turn of the wheel. He believed that the gods, or perhaps the laws of nature, ensure that no civilization becomes too proud to disconnected from the source of life. When we reach a peak of material power but lose our moral compass, the cycle resets. The water rises, or the fire falls, and the slate is wiped clean. This idea of the reset is something we find echoed in modern thought as well, though in a more sociological way. Think of the theory known as the fourth turning. It suggests that modern history moves in cycles of about 80 to 100 years, roughly the length of a long human life. It speaks of four turnings: a high, an awakening, an unraveling, and finally, a crisis. In the crisis, the old order is torn down, often through great struggle, and a new one is born. It is a smaller wheel turning inside the much larger wheel of the ages. As you breathe slowly, letting your thoughts drift, imagine the world at the peak of one of these great cycles. A civilization has mastered its environment. Its buildings are tall, its commerce is vast, and its knowledge is deep. But beneath the surface, the energy is beginning to change. The growth has reached its limit. The complexity has become too heavy to sustain. There is a quiet, collective feeling that an end is approaching, not necessarily an end of life, but an end of a way of life. If we are the reset of an older civilization, then we are currently living in the high or perhaps the unraveling of our own turn. We look back at the massive stones of Egypt or the submerged ruins in the Atlantic and we see them as mysteries. But perhaps they are simply the markers of where the previous wheel stopped turning. The builders of those monuments might have felt just as permanent as we do. They might have walked their streets with the same confidence, thinking their story would never end. Think of the silence that comes after a collapse. It is a slow, heavy silence that lasts for centuries. This is what we call a dark age. But a dark age is not a void. It is a fallow time. Like a field that lies empty in the winter, the human spirit is resting, gathering strength, and slowly transforming the memories of the past into the myths of the future. The survivors of the previous cycle don't disappear. They become the gods and culture heroes of the next one. They are the ones who teach the new people how to plant grain, how to track the stars, and how to build in stone. We are, in a sense, the inheritors of a very long tradition of starting over. Let the idea of cyclical history bring you a sense of peace. In a linear world, every ending is a tragedy. But in a cyclical world, every ending is a preparation for a new beginning. We don't have to carry the weight of the entire future on our shoulders, because the wheel will turn whether we want it to or not. Our task is simply to live well in the season we have been given. Imagine the earth as a giant clock. The ticking of the seconds is the change of the seasons. The movement of the hours is the rise and fall of empires. And the turning of the great year is the story of humanity itself, moving from the light into the shadow and back into the light again. The ancient Maya understood this deeply. They tracked cycles of time that spanned millions of years. They knew that we are currently living in the fifth sun, and that 4 worlds have already come and gone before us. To them, time wasn't something that was running out. It was something that was always returning. This perspective changes how you look at a ruin. A ruin isn't a sign of failure. It's a seed pod. It's a reminder that even the greatest works of man will eventually return to the earth, and that is okay. As you drift closer to sleep, imagine the wheel turning very, very slowly. You can feel the gentle vibration of it beneath you. You are held in the curve of the arc. There is nothing you need to do to keep it moving. The same force that guides the planets in their orbits guides the flow of history. What if the first civilization was simply the summer of our species? What if the Ice Age was our winter? And what if we are now in the late spring, reaching toward another summer? The knowledge we think we are discovering for the first time, the math, the astronomy, the engineering, might actually be a remembering. We are like a student returning to a book they read long ago, finding familiar passages and rediscovering old truths. The stories of Atlantis, the myths of the flood, the maps of the ice-free poles. These are the bookmarks left by the ones who read the book before us. They are whispering to us across the millennia, telling us that we have been here before, and that we will be here again. The room you are in is quiet. The air is still. You are safe in the now, but you are also a part of the forever. The cycles of civilization are just the breathing of the planet, an inhale of growth and an exhale of release. Let yourself exhale now. Let go of the need for progress, the need for answers, and the need for permanence. You are a passenger on a beautiful, ancient wheel. The stars are moving into their new houses. The great year is turning its page. And as the darkness wraps around you, know that the light will return in its own time, in its own way. The history of the world is a long, slow song, and you are one of its notes. The song doesn't end. It just repeats, each time with a slightly different harmony, a slightly different depth. Sleep now, and let the rhythm of the cycles lull you into rest. The wheel is turning. The world is changing, but you are held in the center of the circle, where it is always quiet, always still, and always home. Everything comes back. Everything begins again. Imagine a world where the hum of electricity has finally stopped. The lights of the great cities flicker out, one by one, and a profound, ancient silence returns to the land. Without the constant, restless hands of humanity to hold it back, nature begins its slow, methodical reclamation. Within just a few decades, the glass in our skyscrapers shatters, and the steel skeletons beneath them begin to rust. Vines crawl up the sides of our monuments, their tiny roots prying into the smallest cracks of concrete, turning stone back into dust. In a few centuries, the great cities we are so proud of, New York, London, Tokyo, would look like strange, jagged forests of moss and metal. The streets would become rivers, the subways would turn into dark, flooded caverns, and the forests would march back into the squares and parks. But even this decay is relatively fast. On a geological timescale, 1,000 years is nothing. If we want to find the true legacy of a civilization, we have to look much deeper into the layers of the earth. Think about the materials we have created. Most of what we build is fragile. Wood rots, steel corrodes, and even our concrete eventually crumbles. But we have left behind things that are more persistent. We have created nuclear waste, held in ceramic pellets and encased in lead and steel. These isotopes will remain hot and dangerous for tens of thousands of years. A silent, invisible fire buried deep in the bedrock. To a future archaeologist, these might be the cursed sites of an ancient, forgotten people, tombs of energy that no one remembers how to open. And then there is the plastic. We have produced billions of tons of it. While it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, it doesn't truly go away. It finds its way into the sediment of the ocean floor, forming a distinct synthetic layer in the rocker technofossil. Millions of years from now, a scientist from another species might look at a slice of limestone and find a strange, colorful vein of polymers, the only remaining evidence of a global consumer culture that lasted only a few centuries. But even these traces might be thin. This brings us to a fascinating thought experiment known as the Silurian hypothesis. It asks a simple, startling question. If an industrial civilization existed on Earth millions of years before humans, would we even know? If a civilization like ours lived and died 60 million years ago, in the age of the dinosaurs, the tectonic plates of the Earth would have recycled almost everything they built. Their cities would have been ground into dust by subduction or buried so deep that they turned into oil and gas. Their grandest achievements would be reduced to a few chemical anomalies in the soil, a brief spike in carbon, a strange concentration of heavy metals, or a layer of sediment that doesn't quite fit the natural patterns. When we look back at the history of our planet, we see several of these anomalies. There are moments when the Earth's temperature spiked suddenly, or when the chemistry of the oceans changed overnight. We usually attribute these to volcanoes or comet impacts, but the Silurian hypothesis gently suggests that we might be looking at the industrial exhaust of a civilization we can't see. Perhaps the first civilization didn't leave behind pyramids or statues. Perhaps they left behind a change in the atmosphere that we are only just now learning to read. It is a thought that makes our own struggles feel very small and very quiet. We think of our technology as the pinnacle of existence, but in the eyes of the Earth, it may be just a brief fever. The Earth has a way of smoothing out the wrinkles we leave behind. It washes itself with the rain, it buries its past in the mud, and it starts again with a fresh, green coat of life. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the Earth long after we are gone. The air is pure and sweet again. The oceans are clear. The ruins of our cities have been ground down into sand, and the plastic has been compressed into a thin, dark line of stone. The animals that roam the plains have no memory of us. To them, the remaining fragments of our bridges are just strange rock formations, and the hum of our satellites is just a distant, fading echo in the stars. There is a peace in this vanishing. It means that the Earth is resilient. It means that no matter how much we change the world eventually heals itself. We are a part of a cycle that is much larger than our machines and our buildings. We are a biological event, a brief flowering of consciousness on a planet that has seen many such flowerings before and will see many more after we are gone. What if the first civilization felt exactly as we do? What if they sat in their rooms, looking out at their own version of a modern world, wondering if they would be remembered? And what if their only legacy is the very ground we walk on, the very air we breathe, and the strange, persistent myths of a golden age that they whispered into the ears of the survivors? The silence of the future is the same as the silence of the past. It is a soft, welcoming darkness where all things return to their source. You are returning to your source now as well. Your thoughts are becoming simpler, your breath more rhythmic. You don't need to leave a mark on the world tonight. You only need to exist, to breathe, and to let go. The Earth will take care of the rest. It will hold your memories in its stones and your dreams in its winds. It will keep the story going long after the last book has turned to dust. Sleep now, in the quiet knowledge that you are a part of a beautiful, eternal vanishing. The world is renewing itself, even as you rest. The stars are shining on a planet that knows how to remember and how to forget in perfect balance. The lights are out. The machines are still. The forest is growing. Imagine the map of the world as it was 12,000 years ago. Because so much of the Earth's water was locked away in massive ice sheets, the sea level was nearly 400 feet lower than it is today. This means that millions of square miles of land that is now the continental shelf was once dry, fertile, and inviting. If you were an ancient traveler, you could walk from England to France across a vast meadow. You could walk from Indonesia to Australia. The coastlines of the world were not where they are now. They were miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, further out. And this is where the mystery deepens. Humanity has always been a coastal species. We gather where the rivers meet the sea, where the climate is temperate and the resources are abundant. If a first civilization existed, It wouldn't have built its greatest cities in the harsh interiors of continents or on the peaks of mountains. It would have built them on the shores, when the ice melted and the oceans rose during that turbulent end to the Younger Dryas. The heart of our history didn't just collapse, was submerged. Think of the silence of the underwater world. The sunlight filters down in long, shimmering beams of turquoise and emerald, growing dimmer and colder the deeper you go. There are no winds here, no fires, and no seasons, only the slow, rhythmic pulse of the currents. This is the greatest graveyard of history. Anything built of wood or fabric would have been reclaimed by the sea long ago, but the stones remain, hidden beneath layers of silt and coral. Let us drift in our minds to the coast of northwest India, to the Gulf of Comhat. Here, beneath the churning waters, marine archaeologists have found the remains of a vast city, often associated with the legendary Dwarka of ancient Sanskrit texts. This wasn't just a village. It was a sprawling urban center, miles long, with organized streets, granaries, and massive stone walls. The artifacts recovered, pottery, beads, and even teeth suggest a culture that was thriving long before the rise of the Indus Valley. Civilization. Imagine the moment the water arrived. It might not have been a sudden wave, but a persistent, unstoppable rising. Each year, the tide came in a little further and stayed a little longer. The harbors became unusable. The lower streets became marshes. Eventually, the temples and the homes were abandoned to the fish and the kelp. Today, Dwarka sits in the dark, a silent witness to a time when the geography of the world was entirely different. Now, let us travel across the Pacific to the tiny island of Yonaguni, near the southern tip of Japan. Beneath the waves here lies a structure that defies easy explanation. It is a massive, monolithic formation of sandstone, often called the Yonaguni Monument. It features flat terraces, sharp right angles, and what looked like staircases carved into the bedrock. Some say it is a natural formation, a quirk of the currents and the stone, but others, standing in the presence of its sheer, 90-degree walls and perfectly level platforms, feel the unmistakable hand of a designer. Imagine an ancient diver descending through the clear blue water to touch the surface of these stones. If Yonaguni was once above sea level, it would have been over 10,000 years ago. It stands as a silent sentinel at the edge of the abyss, a platform that might have once overlooked a verdant valley now lost to the sea. Whether carved by nature or by man, it evokes a sense of profound antiquity, a reminder that the ocean floor is a landscape we have barely begun to map. There are thousands of such sites waiting to be found, beneath the North Sea, beneath the Caribbean, beneath the Mediterranean. We have only explored perhaps 5% of the ocean floor with any degree of detail. We are like people trying to understand the history of a great library by looking only at the books that fell off the shelves and onto the sidewalk. The real collection, the massive, heavy volumes of our pasties inside, behind a door made of 400 feet of salt water. Think of the continental shelf, flooding not as a tragedy, but as a preservation. The ocean is a gentle caretaker in some ways. It protects its ruins from the erosion of the wind and the destructive hands of later civilizations. While a city on land might be quarried for its stone to build a newer city, a city under the sea is left alone. It sleeps in the silt, waiting for a time when our technology is quiet enough and our minds are open enough to find it. As you drift closer to sleep, imagine the weight of the water above these lost cities. It is a peaceful weight. It is a blue blanket that has covered the past for 10 millennia. You can feel that same stillness now. The world above the surface, the cars, the screens, the noises becoming distant. You are sinking into the quiet, cool depths of your own subconscious. The first civilization doesn't feel like a theory when you are in the deep. It feels like a presence. You can almost see the outlines of the stone walls in the dim light. You can almost hear the muffled tolling of a bell in the current. We are a species that has forgotten how much we have lost, but the ocean hasn't forgotten. It holds every grain of sand, every carved pillar, and every anchor ever dropped. Let the image of the kelp swaying slowly in the current be your last thought. It moves with a grace that doesn't belong to the world of air. Everything in the deep moves slowly. Everything is patient. You are patient too. You don't need to discover the secrets tonight. They have been underwater for 12,000 years. They can wait for another morning. For now, just let the tide of sleep carry you away from the shore. Let the salt and the silt wash away the memories of the day. The ocean is vast. The history is deep, and you are safe, floating in the heart of the mystery. Sleep now. The water is still. The stars are reflected on the surface far above. I hope you are feeling very peaceful now, your breath moving in a slow, easy rhythm, like the tide touching the shore. To answer this question, we must look not at what we build, but at the planet we build upon. We must understand that the Earth is not a static stage. It is a living, breathing, and incredibly restless entity. It is a master of disguise and a tireless eraser of its own footsteps. Imagine the Earth's crust as a series of vast, slow-moving conveyor belts. This is the process of plate tectonics. We live our entire lives on these plates, thinking of the ground as the very definition of solid. But on the scale of geological time, the ground is fluid. In a process called subduction, the edges of these plates are constantly being pushed down into the fiery mantle of the Earth, where they are melted back into molten rock. Think of what this means for a civilization. If a city was built on a coastline or a tectonic boundary 20 million years ago, that city, its skyscrapers, its libraries, its monuments has not just crumbled. It has been physically pulled into the interior of the planet. It has been melted down, its atoms redistributed, and eventually birthed back out through a volcano as fresh lava. The Earth literally recycles itself. It takes the old and turns it into the new, leaving no trace of what was there before. We are walking on a surface that has been paved and repaved countless times. And then there is the relentless, patient work of the elements. We have spoken of the stones, but even stone is not eternal. Imagine a mountain range. To us, it is a symbol of permanence. But to the wind and the rain, it is merely a suggestion. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the rain leaches away the minerals, and the wind polishes the peaks into dust. Glaciers, those massive rivers of ice, act like giant sheets of sandpaper, grinding entire mountain ranges into fine silt, and pushing that silt into the depths of the ocean. If the first civilization lived during a previous interglacial period, the subsequent advance of the ice would have acted as a planetary scale eraser. Imagine an ice sheet 2 miles thick grinding across northern Europe or North America. It doesn't just knock down buildings, it pulverizes them. It turns cities into a thin layer of clay at the bottom of a glacial lake. By the time the ice retreats, the landscape has been completely redesigned. The hills are in different places, the rivers flow in different directions, and the slate is perfectly clean. Consider too the fragility of our own records. We live in the information age, And yet our information is perhaps the most fragile in history. We store our knowledge on magnetic drives and digital clouds mediums that require a constant supply of energy to survive. If the power were to go out tomorrow and stay out, how much of our history would be readable in 1,000 years? Our books are made of acidic paper that yellows and brittle. Our films decay. Our photographs fade. The only things that truly last are the things that are low-tech. The carvings in a granite cave. The foundations of a megalithic temple. But even these are subject to the human record fragility. We have a tendency, as a species, to reuse what we find. Ancient temples are broken up to build medieval walls. Beautiful statues are melted down for their metal. We are the greatest looters of our own past. We take the evidence of the first civilization and we incorporate it into our own, until the original source is lost to memory. Let your mind drift to the idea of deep time. We have been modern humans for maybe 200,000 years, but the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. If you imagine the entire history of the Earth as a single 24-hour day, human civilization has only existed for the very last fraction of a second before midnight. There is so much room in that day for other stories to have been told. What if a civilization existed that didn't use metal or plastic? What if they mastered a form of biology or a type of stonecraft that we can't recognize? We look for things that look like our technology gears, wires, screens. But an advanced culture might have moved past those things. They might have lived in such harmony with the environment that their cities looked like forests, and their energy left no chemical trace. How do you find a civilization that left no trash? As you settle deeper into your rest, think about the silence not as an absence of evidence, but as a testament to the Earth's power. There is a certain humility in realizing that we are guests on a world that knows how to clean up after its visitors. We are not the owners of this planet. We are its temporary tenants. The first civilization may be all around us, hidden in plain sight. They are in the strange genetic anomalies of our crops. They are in the mathematical constants built into the oldest pyramids. They are in the myths that everyone knows but no one can explain. They didn't leave us a manual. They left us a legacy of survival. Imagine the Earth as a vast library where someone has gone through and pulled all the labels off the books. The information is still there, on every page, in every chapter. But we have to learn how to read the language of the Earth itself to find it. We have to look at the chemistry of the ice cores and the magnetic signatures in the rocks. The silence is peaceful. It means the world is fresh. It means that every morning when the sun rises, we are starting with a world that feels new, even if it is incredibly old. We are not burdened by the weight of 1 billion years of ruins. The Earth has tucked its old stories away, deep in the mantle, deep under the silt, and deep in our hearts. You don't need to find the evidence tonight. You don't need to prove anything to the darkness. You only need to feel the vastness of the time you belong to. You are a part of a long, long line of dreamers. The silence is not a void. It is a space for you to rest. Let the thoughts of subduction and erosion become like a gentle, slow-motion movie in your mind. See the mountains turning to sand. See the oceans rising and falling. See the continents drifting like great ships on a sea of fire. It is all moving in a perfect slow-motion dance. There is no hurry. There is no lost time. Everything that is truly important is carried forward. The wisdom, the resilience, the spark of curiosity, these things don't need to be carved in stone to survive. They are carried in the breath, They are carried in the way we look at the stars. The earth is quiet now. The eraser has passed over the day, and now it is night. The slate is clean for your dreams. Sleep now. The deep time is holding you. The planet is turning, and the silence is exactly as it should be. Everything is forgotten. Everything is new. We have traveled through the shadows of submerged cities, felt the chill of the younger dryas ice, and traced the lines of maps that seem to remember a world we have forgotten. We have looked at the massive, silent stones that defy our timelines, and we have pondered the stories of floods that appear in every corner of our world. Now, as the final embers of our journey glow softly, we find ourselves standing on a threshold. We must ask the quietest, most profound question of all. Are we truly the first to reach these heights, or are we simply the latest? I hope you are resting deeply now, your body feeling like a part of the bed, your thoughts moving like clouds across a late evening sky. There is no need for answers tonight. There is only the beauty of the question. For so long, we have lived with the story of a straight-liner steady climb from the cave to the stars. It is a comforting story because it makes us feel like the winners of history. But as we sit in this stillness, let us consider the humility of the circle. Let us consider the possibility that humanity is like the earth itself, being that goes through seasons, that blooms in the warmth and retreats in the cold, that learns and forgets and learns all over again. Think about the sheer scale of time we have discussed. If our modern era, this age of silicon and steel, has only truly existed for a few centuries, what does that say about the hundreds of thousands of years that came before? We are taught that those were years of stagnation, of slow, primitive struggle, but the stones tell a different story. The precision of the Great Pyramid, the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe, the machined blocks of Puma, Punku. These are not the works of people who were just beginning to think. They are the works of people who had already mastered the world. What if civilization is not a discovery, but a recurring phenomenon? What if, every few thousand years, the earth undergoes a transformation so profound that the slate is wiped clean, and the survivors are forced to start again? If this is true, then we are not the pinnacle. We are a reset. We are the grandchildren of a forgotten world, playing with the fragments of a technology and a wisdom we can barely comprehend. We look at the stars and think we are the first to understand their movements. But perhaps we are only rediscovering the maps that were already drawn 10,000 years ago. Imagine the people of that first world. Perhaps they didn't live in cities of concrete and glass. Perhaps their greatness was of a different kind, a mastery of sound, of vibration, of the subtle energies of the planet. Maybe they didn't need to burn the earth to power their lives. And when the cataclysm came, the fire from the sky or the rising of the deep, they didn't leave behind plastic or nuclear waste. They left behind the only thing they knew would survive the long winter of the soul. They left behind the stone. They carved their knowledge into the most durable material the planet could provide, hoping that one day their descendants would look at those stones and remember, we are those descendants. And as we look back, we see the echoes of their struggle. We see it in our myths, those memories we spoke of. We see it in the sudden explosion of agriculture and writing that seemingly appeared out of nowhere. We see it in our own restlessness, our drive to build bigger, to go further, to know more. It is as if we are trying to reclaim something we lost, a birthright that was taken from us by the ice and the flood. There is a certain peace in this perspective. It takes away the pressure of being the first. It means we are part of a lineage that is incredibly old and incredibly resilient. We are survivors. We are the ones who made it through the darkness. And if we are a reset, it means that the spark of civilization is not something fragile that can be easily extinguished. It is a part of who we are as a species. It is an instinct, like the birds that know how to migrate without being taught. We know how to build, how to create, and how to wonder, but it also carries a warning. If history is a circle, then the turnings of the wheel are inevitable. We live in a world that feels very permanent, just as the people of the first civilization likely did. We think our knowledge is safe in our digital clouds and our libraries. But we have seen how quickly the climate can shift, how easily the coastlines can be rewritten. We are reminded that we are guests on a very old, very active planet. Our task is not to conquer the earth, but to learn how to live within its rhythms, so that when the next turn of the wheel comes, we leave behind something worth remembering. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, let the boundaries of your own life soften. You are not just a person living in the 21st century. You are a link in a chain that stretches back into the mist of the deep past and forward into a future we can only imagine. You carry the DNA of the builders of Göbekli Tepe. You carry the curiosity of the navigators who drew the ancient maps. You carry the resilience of the ones who survived the great floods. The first civilization is not gone. It is in you. It is in the way you look at the moon and feel a sense of mystery. It is in the way you seek out patterns and meaning in the world. It is in the silence of the night, when the modern world falls away and you are left with the same stars that the ancients watched. They are our brothers and sisters, separated by a vast ocean of time, but united by the same human heart. The world is very quiet now. The stories have all been told, and the questions have been asked. The air in your room is cool and still, and the darkness is a soft, protective blanket. You don't need to worry about the end of civilizations or the movement of the ice. The earth has been through this many times before, and it knows exactly what to do. It is turning, slowly and surely, carrying us all toward the dawn. Perhaps we are the first. Perhaps we are the latest. In the end, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the wonder. What matters is that we are here, in this brief window of light between the shadows, asking these questions and feeling this connection to the past. We are the consciousness of the planet, trying to remember its own story. Let your mind drift away from the stones and the myths. Let it drift away from the theories and the maps. Let it drift into the pure, wordless space of sleep. The mystery will be there when you wake up. The stones will still be silent. The ocean will still hold its secrets. You have done enough tonight. You have traveled far enough. Imagine the earth 1,000,000 years from now. The continents have shifted again. The mountains we know have been ground down, and new ones have risen in their place. The ice has come and gone, and the forests have reclaimed the cities. And maybe, in that distant future, someone will be walking along a new coastline. They might find a strange, polished piece of stone, or a fragment of a material they don't recognize. They will pick it up, turn it over in their hands, and feel a faint, distant hum of curiosity. They will look up at the same stars we are looking at now. They will wonder who we were, what we loved, and what we knew. They will wonder if they are the first civilization to ever walk the earth, and they will feel the same quiet, haunting connection to us that we feel to the ones who came before. The circle continues. The breath goes in, and the breath goes out. The light fades, and the night begins. You are safe. You are part of the story. You are exactly where you belong. Sleep now. Let the current carry you. Let the silence hold you. The world is old, and it is wise, and it is taking care of everything. Everything is a memory. Everything is a dream. Maybe one day, someone will wonder about us.